for me again. Okay.
One.
Okay, so can you just introduce yourself, your name, your occupation?
I'm Bengali, and so being Bengali was a big thing. When I was growing up, we were, you could say, seasonal Muslims. You know, we prayed during Eid, we fasted during Ramadan. I went to Sunday school, but that was much more of a cultural thing more than it was an Islamic thing.
My parents came from Pakistan. I was born and raised in New Jersey. Growing up, you know, Islam was an important part of our lives. I went to Sunday school, I learned how to read Arabic, all the basics. I had a very strong group of friends growing up who were all Muslim, so we grew up together almost as siblings. This one particular friend, our parents go way back. They all came to the country around the same time, and so the immigrant experience, they got very close. It was very much like family.
I was born in Framingham, Massachusetts. My mom is Pakistani, she's from Karachi, and my dad is Indian from Bombay. Growing up, I think Islam and being Pakistani, Indian, that was a big part of how I defined myself. Culture and religion and sort of behaviors or expected behaviors, that all was sort of tied into my upbringing.
My friend's a little bit older than me. When I was born, she was like my big sister. I grew up with all her cousins, all her aunts, all her uncles, kind of like as if they were my own. He was relatively new to the country, and I didn't know him very well, but because he was always at these family functions and gatherings, he was somebody that I was made to think I should trust. I was 8. I didn't ever question that until he betrayed that trust.
In the beginning, it was random men that my dad was friends with. And so these men would, you know, tell my parents that they're taking me out for ice cream. But you know what? In reality, I never went out for ice cream. I was like about 12, 13. He was probably in his mid-20s. We would still see him at family functions. Everyone would always ask me, like, you know, what's wrong? I was very abrasive, I was very aggressive. My dad would say, hey, you know, you need to behave, but I didn't want to have anything to do with him or his family. I had to grow up really fast.
When I was in 10th grade, so I was 15, we went on a trip. I always went to this one fruit seller on the street. And he always ran the market with his father. And every time I'd go there, he would stare at me a little bit, and I wouldn't really notice that much. You know, it was just a couple days before I was supposed to leave and go back home. I went, and his father wasn't there with him. And he had like 4 or 5 friends that were also there. I was walking home. It was starting to get dark. I kind of looked behind me just to see what was happening, and I noticed that all 4 of them were following me. And so I kept walking. I kept walking a little faster, turned around, and they were closer. So I started running, and I could hear them running after me, and they were yelling. And then I felt one of their hands, someone's hands, closed around my mouth and my ears and my eyes, and suddenly I couldn't see anything. And they dragged me to some other side street, and my whole body just froze. And I guess from there, it's kind of obvious what happened.
First time I met someone who was a victim of a sexual assault was probably when I was I want to say around 23 years old.
The notion escapes us at times as to the importance and impact that we can have on the
She wanted to understand, why would God let something like this happen? And I feel many of the responses that she was forced to digest, that at times the Muslim community imposes upon others when, in my opinion, they don't really have a mechanism or understanding of how to deal with something, left her in a place very unsettled. Just put your trust in God. Have your faith in God. This is a test from God. And in her own words, why is God testing a 5-year-old?
Every time I was in a situation with, let's say an old uncle, like a non-relative uncle, or even my cousin, it was always a feeling of disgust. It was always a feeling of secrecy and not understanding why I had to be secret about it, but for some reason it was like this innate feeling. All I know is the feelings that I had coming out of those situations, or sometimes I'll have flashbacks and I'll remember exactly what certain people did. But for the most part, that's just a part of my childhood that I wish to forget, wish to ignore.
And I just remember going back to the United States, and then after that I kind of just shut it out of my mind and didn't really think about it or register or even comprehend what had happened for another couple of years.
I didn't recognize it was sexual abuse until I was a lot older and I started reading things like novels, news articles. Once I recognized that, I was horrified, but I stayed silent, so no one knew anything about it for, you could say, close to 16 years. It's very simple why I didn't talk out about it, because we don't talk about sex in a Muslim Desi household. And if we do, it's always don't have sex. It's always wait till you're married. Oh, this is haram.
For a long time, I did not understand what had happened to me. I tried to rationalize it by thinking maybe it's something that's supposed to happen or it happened to everybody else. And it wasn't until I was in middle school that I learned about sexual abuse in health class. That's when I realized that that's what happened to me. So I went to the guidance counselor at my school. She pretended to care a little bit. She forced me to tell my mother, basically saying that if I didn't tell my mother, that she would. Beyond that, she gave me no guidance whatsoever. She just was very dismissive and just made me feel like as though, I should just move on, get over it, move on. When I told my mom, she shut down pretty much. She was really heartbroken by it, and felt very betrayed as well. But she never spoke to anybody else about it, so she didn't know that she was supposed to help me get through this. That was pretty much the start and the end of it at that point.
When I told my mother, the reaction that I got was not one that I anticipated, because she's usually very open-minded, a lot more progressive than any, Desi Muslim mother that I know. But her response was, it was very familiar in that it was one of any typical brown Muslim mother. She was understanding, but also confused and also just very unaware of how to interact and how to carry that conversation. She told me, well, at least you weren't raped. You act like these things don't happen to girls, and maybe it's a good thing that it happened to you because it makes you stronger and you can walk away feeling stronger about this. And so I was really upset, and I told her, no, this is unfair. No one should ever have to go through this to understand what strength is. Strength can come from many different things, and this is one thing that I wish never happened.
Individuals who are coming with wounds and scars that are internal, that you might not necessarily see a physical manifestation of, it doesn't mean that those pains don't exist. When we have this very simplistic rhetoric and discourse in the Muslim community that equates everything to a test and says that you have to put your trust in God, and we answer the question of why with an actual answer, as opposed to saying, I don't know, we're not answering for the sake of the person always, but to at times justify our passivity.
feeling a lot of anger, but I think it was overshadowed by the fact that I felt shame that this had happened.
I felt like if I was silent about it, this was me being able to get over it and eventually overcome it.
You know, you're not supposed to talk about sex or boys or let alone, you know, rape or sexual assault.
It wasn't like somebody ever told me you should be ashamed of something like this. My mom never said that directly to me. But the silence, the implication of that you should keep quiet about it and not say anything, that was definitely there. The idea, you know, and I mean, as I got older, the idea that nobody would want to marry you if they found out was always there.
This is my first, you know, sexual experience. This is not how it was supposed to go. This is not right. This is not Islamic. This is not appropriate. Like, all of these things were going through my head, and I knew that this just wasn't right and this didn't fit, and I didn't know how it was ever going to be accepted by anyone. I didn't know if it was supposed to be accepted. I didn't know what to really do with it. So I just kind of put it away.
The young man who came to see me with his female cousin, who was going to high school in New York City. And in between classes, she was walking in the hallway, and a male student at her high school grabbed her, took her into an empty stairwell, and raped her. She went home and told her parents, who were immigrants. And her parents, you know, thank God, were receptive to the story. They didn't react in a way that said, don't tell anyone, what will people think, you have to kind of keep it to yourself. But they were encouraging of, let's find some kind of help. So their most logical assumption was, let's go to the local mosque and, you know, talk to the imam there. And his response to her was, you know, you deserve it. You go to a school where genders are not separated and you don't wear a headscarf. You know, this is something that is your own fault. What he is saying in this girl's mind is not going to be tied to him, but what she will believe that Islam actually, you know, is telling her. What Islam tells us is that Allah does not take people into account for things that they're coerced into, things that are beyond their ability to control. But the reality is such that the vastness of compassion and mercy that is divine is magnified that much more when we see at times the idiocy and ignorance of God's creation, who are unwilling to really be able to empathize with people in their most staunch moments of need.
After this happened, a lot of things changed in terms of how I looked at God or looked at the purpose of religion or faith and what these things meant in my life. The biggest thing that was going through my head was, you know, if there's God, why did he let something so bad happen to me? And I know it sounds selfish, but that's kind of what was going through my head always at the time, and I kind of just stopped seeing the purpose in praying, you know, 5 times a day. That didn't help prevent this. You know, if I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing in the Quran, why did this kind of thing happen? There's a lot of emphasis in Islam for women to be modest. I always felt like we're supposed to be the clean ones, the pure ones, and something like sexual assault comes and totally ruins that cleanliness. And I remember just feeling, you know, at the sense of it, dirty and not deserving of the title of maybe Muslim or Muslim female.
Where we find many Muslims today is not in a place where they're engaging Islam for what it actually is, but they're engaging Islam for what they want it to be. I want to prove this. Here are the solitary verses and narrations in our tradition that prove X, Y, or Z. It's just a stupid pursuit that one would get to a place where they need scripture to prove or disprove the idea that a woman is much more than what one would label her to be, given the experiences that she's had in her life, physical or otherwise, and especially those that she was unjustly drawn into.
remember having nightmares like every night, probably for about a year or two straight. Every night I had the same nightmare over and over and over again. I knew what it was about, but I didn't know how to, interpret it in any way, or was really something to be interpreted, but I kind of just would always wake up scared or screaming and then kind of just go on with the day. And I knew it was going to happen again that same night, and it kind of just became a part of daily life. I definitely took this out on my parents. I pushed my brother away. He was kind of young at the time, but I lashed out at them a lot for no reason. To them, it seemed like no reason at all. I just started, I was just being an angsty teenager to them. Like, they didn't know what was happening, but I was very angry, very, very isolationist during high school. My mom would always ask me, "What's wrong? Why are you this way?" And I would just, respond with some sarcastic remark or some angry remark.
I was a good student, I didn't cause much trouble, so everything from the outside appeared to be that I was a perfectly normal kid. But on the inside, I always felt very different. I started noticing this huge divide between this part of me that wanted to grow up and be an adult and who felt ready to be an adult. There was this part of me that still was that little girl, that 8-year-old girl, completely confused, not understanding what happened or why it happened. Because of what that guidance counselor said to me, just get on, move on with it, get over it, I basically tried to suppress that girl. Her pain, I would always feel it, but I would always tell myself, just get over it, just get over it.
Being abused as a child and being assaulted takes away so much of your power and so much of yourself that you don't really know who you are anymore, at least for me. Since the moment I realized what it meant to be molested, I stopped feeling.
I did have friends, but there was always that point at which we came up against a wall where I couldn't go any further, and then we would eventually start growing apart.
And I sort of systematically started cutting myself off from a lot of my friends, and if some guy asked me out in high school or said I was pretty or something, I would just immediately shut down. I used to be super outgoing and friendly, and that kind of all sort of got suppressed, and I sort of retreated back into myself.
I didn't realize that subconsciously I felt as though because he did this to me, that I must be a bad person. That because when you're a child, you tend to associate punishment with having done something bad. I became very obsessed with stories of conflict and war because that was my way of telling myself I should just get over what happened to me because there's so much worse going on in the world. All that obsession fed my depression in a lot of ways.
I decided I wanted to report and do something about it. I had a lot of great support, I had a great attorney. It was very nice to just get that reassurance that yes, this is assault. You have more than enough evidence to press charges. I went to the Brooklyn precinct. The detectives hook up the recorder machine and they're like, okay, so now call him. And I said, excuse me? I'm the one that's going to be calling the person that assaulted me? They called it the surprise approach. I had the phone in my hand and it dropped several times because I was shaking and I'd been crying the entire time. He denied everything, and then he said, I'm sorry you don't remember anything, and I did not mean to take advantage of you, but maybe we should sit down for coffee one day and talk about this. They wanted to catch him off guard so he wouldn't have any time to think about a lie. But you know what? It doesn't take much to say, no, I didn't rape you. You don't have to think about that twice. The detectives basically said, oh, well, he stated that you were the one that had asked for it. It's interesting that you're here and trying to arrest him, but he's not here trying to ask for your arrest. Maybe we should arrest you. 3 hours with these detectives accusing me of wanting to have sex with this man and being told that I was 23 and just being promiscuous. Told, especially by the female detective, you need to be a stronger woman. And I thought to myself, I'm coming to you 6-7 months after the fact. That doesn't make me strong? Does that make me weak? And I left the precinct. Because at that point, I knew nothing was gonna happen.
I started seeing a therapist when I was 18. I never mentioned my abuse to her. I was still very impacted by what the guidance counselor said, and I was afraid of getting that same response again. And I always felt like I was dealing with all the symptoms of my depression, but never really the root of it. And on some level, I feel like I always knew what the root of it was. When I was 26, the therapist that I saw, she was the first one to point blank ask me, have you been sexually abused when you were young? I said yes. She sort of reacted in a way where she's like, this is really serious, we have to deal with this. That's when I realized, wow, I really have been neglecting something that I should not be neglecting.
First time I told someone was my senior fall of high school. I had become really close to one of my teachers, my English teacher, Miss Hawthorne. And I don't know what it was about her. She's this really strong, bold woman. She says what she thinks. She was the person that I trusted, and I wanted someone to know because it was sort of just bursting out. And I remember sitting in the library alone one day studying, and this big wave just came over me, and I just decided to email her, and I said, Miss Hawthorne, can you meet me in like half an hour in the cafeteria? I know it's after hours, but like there's something I need to tell you.
I remember her saying, I need to talk to you. I mean, it was urgent. And I remember thinking, okay, this is something that I need to be there now. We
just sat there alone on the couches, and I talked for like 3 hours, and I cried for the first time about this.
I don't think I cried that day. I think I did. I think there was one tear because I was trying to keep it together. Because it wasn't about me. And it was about her needing to tell me this horrible thing that happened to her. But also something that certainly shaped her life and would continue to shape her life.
She didn't even have to talk that much. She just sort of let me talk. I felt like I was being listened to. I felt like she wanted to help in whatever way that she could. After I told her, a wave sort of left, and the nightmares started becoming less and less frequent, and I think that sort of set a chain for me to start accepting and trying to address the problem of shame rather than just put it away, because that clearly wasn't working.
You hear stories about these victims who go to the precincts, and every story I've read cannot describe to you the actual moment and feeling of what is going on. My functionality in life just kept diminishing. I unfortunately came to a moment in my life this summer where I had not 1 but 3 failed suicide attempts. It was a very tough summer. It was like a slap in the face. Not just for me, but for my family. And that was one of the biggest changes in my life this summer, was having not only my parents support me on mental health, but also kind of understanding the realm behind abuse. My family's support was more than anything that I could have asked for.
I realized I had reached the point where I could no longer keep living, feeling the way I had felt up until then. And I've decided if I'm gonna change, it might as well be now. Speaking to my family at that point became a necessity for me. I realized that's the only way for me to move on. I always felt like I was being somebody else on the outside and my real, insecure child on the inside. Because I felt that divide between those selves, I realized I needed to bring them back together. And the only way to do that is to be myself both around others and with myself. I came forward to my mother when I was 13. And then when I was 28, I came forward to her the second time. I wasn't sure how she felt about this whole situation because we never spoke about it. But the fact that she never again mentioned it to me made me feel as though either she didn't care or she didn't think it was enough of a big deal to ever talk about again, or that she also felt that I should just get over it and move on. And I was afraid she would think I was weak for not being able to do that. I had written out this whole letter because I was so nervous. We sat down after breakfast and I pulled out my papers and, just started reading to her. I was just crying so much, and I had never cried that hard in my life. To the point, I could not even speak for the first, I don't know how long. I read through the whole letter, and she just looked at me the whole time, did not say anything, did not make any expression. So I had no idea what she was thinking. But finally at the end, she walked over to me and hugged me and started crying. And then she started opening up about how this is something that's always bothered her too. She just never knew how to handle it. She thought she was doing the right thing for me by never talking about it again. Having her tell me I also felt this way, and we've been suffering in silence separately all this time. It was a really important moment to find out that my mom really did care and that she really wanted me to get better and she wanted to help me get better.
First time I told my family was 6 years later, and there's this thing I wanted to tell is the most important thing in my life, and they didn't know that, and I felt like in that way they didn't really know me at all. I remember sitting in my room and I just came down the stairs and I said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." I had no preparation for this. I just kind of wanted to get it out there and finally be on the same page as her and my dad and my brother. I told my mom first alone. She cried for probably 10 minutes straight. And then we all went into the basement and we told my brother and my dad. And my father cried, and it was, I think, the first time I'd actually seen him cry. I expected, based on this whole cultural fabric, that my family would, 1, not believe me, 2, get angry that I wasn't a virgin anymore, or 3, some combination of these things. I don't know. It never crossed my mind that they would feel hurt or feel sad or feel angry at the situation. I just sort of dehumanized them in my head and made them out to be the enemy. The reaction I did get from them really surprised me, and it just kind of made me sad that I could have done this 6 years earlier, and our relationship could have been so different.
My mother is actually the one who spoke to my friend's parents. Our families are very intertwined, very close. This act was going to affect all of us. I really did not expect them to react the way they did. I'm extremely grateful, but it did come as a huge surprise. My friend's father confronted his brother, who was my abuser. He immediately got defensive and denied it. He actually claimed that, there must have been some other, uncle who looked like him that I confused them with. And I've never for a second doubted that it was him. He even went as far as to swear on the Quran that he didn't do it. My friend's father is very religious. And I was very nervous that might sway my friend's father. I wasn't sure that he believed me after that. But amazingly, he did. Even so, there were certain people in the extended family who, after hearing him deny it, were not sure anymore. And these are all people that I grew up with, who I knew very, very well. We may have people in our families who have been abusers. And it's really, that's a tough pill to swallow, but it's the reality. Until we start calling these people out on what they did and shaming them and making them realize that they cannot get away with this, nothing's going to change.
I felt a lot of comfort and at home, in this spiritual community, in this cultural community, and I sort of stepped away from it for a while. I created this, illusion in my head that I was always an outsider because this happened to me. The latter part of college is when I started articulating this more to other friends and being more comfortable talking about it with myself. I kind of started regaining that sense of community again. I don't define myself anymore by this. It's an integral part of me. It's never going to go away, but at the same time, I shouldn't think that someone that I want to get close to is going to always see me as a victim, and just as the same way I shouldn't see them as someone who is going to hurt me. And I think even though this happened, I'm still just as deserving of friendship, of love, of anything as anyone else.
I am a forensic social worker, currently working at New York Asian Women's Center. I'm one of the counselor advocates. The population I work with primarily speaks Bangla, Hindi, Urdu. They're victims of human trafficking, domestic violence, primarily, and sexual assault. I'm working directly with the community that I always wanted to stay connected with. Whatever it is that they need, I help them with. It's about survivorship and what they see themselves as moving forward from their own personal trauma. A part of healing and processing my own trauma is working with other folks that are dealing with the same thing and don't necessarily have the voice. That, for me, makes me want to come to work every day.
I was a bit reserved and a little bit closed off and maybe sometimes even defensive with people. I assumed that meant that I wasn't really meant to do a job that involved services to people. And then through this whole process, I realized that's actually exactly what I want to do. So now I'm at SAYA, South Asian Youth Action. It's a nonprofit in Queens. One of the reasons I love working with high school youth is because when I think back to that time in my life, I think about how much I could have used a mentor and somebody I could come to with all my problems. I didn't really have that. Some have even come to me with similar life experiences and have never talked about it before. So I try to be that person for the youth here.
I love you.
In Islam, you have a concept that's called fardul ayn, your individual obligation, your prayer, your fasting, your giving of charity, your performance of pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in your life. But we also have a concept that's called fard kifaya, communal obligation. And the idea that most Muslim communities are channeling their money into building mosque upon mosque or Islamic schools, but they're not putting their resources into counselors or rape crisis therapists, I would say is a failure to fulfill a communal responsibility that we need to. There's an absence of resources. There's an absence of services.
Go and build new services. Everything does not have to function through the masjid. It doesn't.
I'm sure, rape and sexual assault happened back in the time of the Prophet. And, there are hadiths that say, this was wrong.
The Prophet not only espoused a rhetoric that was about treating people well, but when he saw injustice, abuses taking place in front of him, he spoke out against it, he compelled others to speak out against it, and he acted upon it.
There's a whole slew of people, unfortunately, that have to go through these things, not just in this community alone, all over the world. I think that's the biggest thing, is just understanding that there's so much out there and that you aren't alone.
For a long time, I couldn't feel it. Even though I told myself, don't hate yourself, I could not feel that. I did actually have a very distinct breakthrough moment where I woke up one morning feeling very different than I had felt the previous days. Before that, I had been going through a very dark time in which I was very depressed, very angry, did not want to see people. And that morning, I woke up and I just suddenly just stopped caring about what anybody thought. Like, you know, the self-consciousness that always plagued me, the fear of people knowing that this happened to me or being afraid of how people would judge me, it was just gone. And I realized I can handle this. Like, I'm strong enough now. I have a completely different relationship with my inner child. Whereas before, I, hated her and felt very angry with her for not being able to get over it. Now I have let her feel through those emotions, so she feels stronger. I support her, and I'm grateful to still have her as somebody who keeps my childlike wonder alive. I think that our community has tremendous potential to deal very well with these issues. It'll get to the point, hopefully, where girls and boys who come forward will not have to feel that same level of shame and won't have to feel as if they're destroying their family or destroying their community. And the person who actually perpetrates the crime will be held accountable for it. The more people talk about it, the more other people will feel okay talking about it. And I hope that changes our culture.